Hi, welcome to Digging for Truth, presented by Associates for Biblical Research. I'm your host, Henry Smith. The 40th chapter of Job describes an animal called Behemoth. The identification of this creature has eluded interpreters for centuries. Today, Dr. Brian Thomas from the Institute for Creation Research joins us to share his perspective about the identification of the behemoth. Brian, welcome back to Digging for Truth. Good to have you back on the show.
Well, it's all my pleasure.
Okay, so we're going into a very interesting topic today together. We do want to say for the audience that we're exploring the possibility of an identification of this creature. We're not being dogmatic, but we think the evidence does point in a particular direction, an interesting direction. So I guess the first thing I should ask you is, what makes you interested in Behemoth in Job chapter 40?
Well, I guess what makes me interested is all the various interpretations. So some of the Bible translator notes in some of our Bibles say likely a hippopotamus, and others say likely an elephant, and then commentators offer other ideas. Maybe it's a woolly mammoth, or maybe it's an extinct creature. And then, of course, we get liberal scholars, I would say, who say, well, here the text shifts from God talking about regular animals to now he's talking about a mythological creature, and that seems to prevail in a lot of circles. So, do we have to be this confused? I mean, is God trying to reveal truth, or is he trying to obfuscate it here? And so I and my co-authors recently published in Bibliotheca Sacra an article where we laid out an array of evidences to identify this guy.
Yeah, that's good. That's a good summary. Okay, so you brought in here the context. I think it's a good starting point as far as, because we have Job 40, and we want to encourage people to open up their Bibles and read through the chapters. But you did mention the larger context, which is Job 38 and 39, which refers to real animals. Just sort of give us sort of animals that we know are real animals that we have experience with. Give us a sense of the approach you guys took to interpreting this and the use of those passages.
Well, there's 12 animals. Behemoth 13, Leviathan number 14. And God is going somewhere with this speech, and he actually got there. And you can discover that for yourselves as you read Job chapter 42. He finally repented. But how is it that the Lord convinced him or persuaded him? What is it that the Lord said that really impacted Job right at that right time, what he needed to hear? And so 12 animals, and like you said, Henry, they're ostriches and eagles and onagers. Now there's not a lot of onagers left, but there's a few, and they're in the Middle East today. The wild ox. So we do have translation troubles because we've kind of lost what these animals exactly were, some of them. So, but I think the ostrich is the right word. It's the right translation. Eagle, I think, might be better, like a buzzard, because it fits the context more. But anyway, they're real animals. I mean, listen to Job 39, 13. The wings of the ostrich wave proudly, and she leaves her eggs in the ground. She forgets that a foot may crush them, because God deprived her of wisdom. Now, this is God claiming that God deprived this animal of a certain kind of wisdom to know how to care for its young. And then he asked the rhetorical question in verse 19, have you given the horse its strength? Implication being, you didn't do it, but I did it. So he's using the actual animals and their actual behaviors and anatomy and abilities to say, look, I'm able. I gave them their abilities. I'm the one who decided to give this creature this kind of wisdom or not, or to make this creature domesticatable, if that's a word, or wild. And some creatures, we still cannot domesticate them. because God didn't put that in their makeup. So God's claiming credit for all those things. And the whole thrust of this is to say, God's saying, I'm revealing who I am, facets of my character through that which I have made, especially these creatures.
Yeah, I thought it's really helpful when I think the broader principle of interpretation, no matter where we're interacting with the biblical text, is always to be looking at context and purpose. Even though Job is written largely as in poetic language, it is describing God's speech. God is being rhetorical with Job, pointing to these are things with which you are familiar, right? That's the touch point between God and Job himself. So the continuity of that into 40 would seem to point to like a real animal. That's the real sense that you get from the text there. At least that's where I come away from, and obviously that's where you're going. Now, let me ask you.
Sure.
Yeah, go ahead.
Before you ask, it's crystal clear. I mean, he says, verse 15, look now, or some translations, behold,
yes,
the behemoth. So
yeah.
if it's not there to consider, then why would he say to consider and to look at it? And it has the anatomy, everything about this, the context, the leading up to it, and the text itself, starting in verse 15. In other words, there's no indicator within the text that says, okay, now we're shifting to an allegory. That's not in there. In fact, it's all the language is very straightforward, and it talks about mountains and grass and a river, real things, and a real animal in that real setting. So it comes across as being real, and I think we have new evidences that suggest that we should have been taking it that way all along.
Okay, so we're going to do something a little different. Usually you lead up to a conclusion, you let the cat out of the bag. We're going to let the cat out of the bag first. Okay, so you let the cat out of the bag first, and then we're going to build a case as to why we think this is the case. So in your judgment, based on your research and your work with your colleagues, this animal looks to you like it is being described as what? What kind of animal?
Can I just eliminate some of the others first?
You sure can. Go ahead.
Well, let's think about the hippo interpretation. It really founders on two verses. Verse 16, which says, "See now his strength is in his hips." Hippo, the biggest, strongest part of its body is probably its mouth, jaws, you might think, or maybe its forelimbs, which are longer and stronger than its hind limbs, not its hips. Second, moves his tail like a cedar. So hippo might eat grass. It actually eats malumbo. First of the ways of God, I don't think it really qualifies for that either in verse 19. So anyway, hippo, you could force that into the text, but it doesn't do justice to the text. So I think you can cross him off. And same with an elephant, large as it may be. Elephant doesn't fit all these. I mean, look at the little hippo tail. It's a little flap, and the little elephant tail is just like a wire.
Yeah, very small.
Thing. This is a tree. It compares the tail of this creature to a tree. And so that's why we're thinking in terms of some sort of a dinosaur.
All right, a dinosaur it is. That's the big reveal, and we're going to explore the question of that. Is this actually the case? Does this fit with some of the evidence we know of? And we'll be right back to explore that together.
Digging for Truth is produced and recorded in the studios of Lighthouse TV. Positively different.
Hi, welcome back to Digging for Truth. We're exploring the question in Job chapter 40, the behemoth. Is this actually a sauropod dinosaur? Could this possibly be one of these great creatures that God created? And we're exploring that question with Dr. Brian Thomas. Brian, okay, so we let the cat out of the bag. That's what we think this animal could very well be. But we want to explore reasons why, right? We want to work through the text and work through what we know about these creatures and see if they fit together. So let's start with verse 15, Brian. You mentioned that God says to Job, look at Behemoth. Look at him. So presumably he's familiar with this creature. Let's talk about what this creature consumes.
Well, first of all, yeah, how could he possibly be familiar with a sauropod dinosaur if sauropod dinosaurs died out, 70 million years ago, and humans hadn't yet evolved until 3 million or whatever years ago? That's just, that's kind of reasoning in a circle, assuming that those ages and periods and epochs are true when we have evidence against that. And so that's kind of where we're headed. So there is evidence against those ages, right? And we've been exploring those for 50 years at the Institute here. So we do think dinosaurs and humans could have been alive at the same time. And it says here, which I made along with you, verse 15, like same day of creation week, day 6, God made the animals, the land animals, and then he made man right along with you men. And this behemoth eats grass like an ox. And we found in India these giant sauropod coprolites, which are waste. They're solid waste, and these got fossilized. And inside the coprolites, there's evidence of grass. So we know that at least the sauropods that died in India were eating grass right before the flood, as the Lord Jesus said in Matthew 24. Came and took them all away. And so some of those dinosaurs might have gone on board Noah's Ark and survived after the flood, but they've since gone extinct from one place or another. Here we have Job living in the Ice Age. We could talk about that in a separate episode or whatever, but there's lots of indications. He talks about ice and snow more than any other Bible author, and living after the flood. And the Middle East was wet and tropical. There was no Sahara Desert yet. That happened after the ice melted back. So we have this potential for creatures like this to have been alive in the Middle East during this time, and that's what the text indicates. In terms of eating grass like an ox, check. They ate grass.
Yeah, right. So that's one data point, and that's good. We know that. Amazing that their waste material is fossilized. That would obviously have to happen very quickly. We know how fast that would disappear under normal circumstances. So let's talk about their size. The biblical text seems to indicate this creature is quite large. How big were sauropod dinosaurs, and what do we estimate how heavy they were?
Well, I'm thinking so. The more we once we narrowed it down to possibility of a sauropod specifically. Now that's the dinosaur that's got 4 legs. I've got a model of one here, and I can show it. 4 legs, long tail, long neck, and this one in particular is a Diplodocus, and it had a really long tail. In fact, a whip-like tail. And most paleontologists who study these guys are convinced that it actually used its tail as a whip. And there's clues in the text that fit that idea also. But this creature was over 90 feet long and almost 30 tons. And it is the largest land creature that has ever lived. We know it only from fossils today. But what better analogy for God to use to point to the greatness and bigness of himself? He says, no one can even approach this. And I think probably he's hard to approach because he'll whip his tail at anyone that approaches. But I, being its maker, can approach it. And so in like manner, I'm the one who has a plan for this creature. Therefore, you should trust that I have, Job, a plan for you and for the issues that you're facing.
Yeah, it's good. The text in verse 17a says that its tail hangs like a cedar. Now, you alluded to this before, that the description of the hippo or the elephant does not seem to fit that at all. But you just alluded to the size of this tail. Let's explore that a little bit, because, if he's describing a real creature, which is what your argument is, then we would look for a creature in the fossil record that would fit.
Right. Yeah. So that's what we've done. So once we realized the fossils were deposited in Noah's flood, that crunches timeline down to biblical history. Then we have dinosaurs maybe surviving on board the ark, come off the ark. So now they're in play. They're possibilities. At least the descendants of the ones that were fossilized. So what we did is, with our co-authors, we did a detailed translation work of all these verses, and we parsed it all out. And I think a better translation there is "he moves," or "he moves down his tail." And in fact, we know anatomically the Diplodocus specifically could, and very likely did, move its back tail down and make it into a tripod so that he would rear up on his front two legs, and his his head would therefore reach even higher. So he would rear up. Now in Jurassic Park, the first one from '93, they had a brachiosaur doing that. Couldn't do that. So that's the wrong anatomy. The brachiosaur has long front limbs, but the Diplodocus has long hind limbs. And in fact, his strength was in his hips, highest point of his body. And then but from those hips, the strength in his hips, he had the strength and the leverage to the musculature to raise up his entire torso and head and neck, and then use that tail as a third leg, as it were.
Yeah, it's incredible what the muscularity would have been for an animal that could have weighed up to 30 tons to be able to move like that. The engineering involved and the strength involved in that would be quite enormous. Well, we're going to keep exploring this with Dr. Brian Thomas. Is the behemoth in Job actually a dinosaur? We'll be right back as we continue discussing this. ABR is excited to announce the publication of Volume 2 from our excavations at Khirbet el-Maqadir. The volume details archaeological remains from about 350 BC to the 8th century. This includes a New Testament village that may have been visited by Jesus. Over 400 pages of analysis, photos, and maps. You can pick up a copy today by visiting BibleArchaeology.org. Hi, welcome back to Digging for Truth. I'm here with Dr. Brian Thomas, and we're exploring the question of the identification of Behemoth in Job chapter 40. Okay, so we've been making what to many might be this crazy claim, Brian, that Behemoth may actually be the description of a sauropod dinosaur. We were talking about the immense strength required, even for it to get up on its tail and reach up and eat. Seems to fit the biblical text well. You wanted to talk, though, next about the bones of this creature. This is described in Job in verse 18a. Let's talk about it.
Well, sure. 18a, his bones are like beams of bronze, and then 18b, his ribs like bars of iron. So beams and bars. And it turns out that these Hebrew words that are translated into these nouns, they seem to indicate, and I'm not saying this is the only way to go. I'm just finding clues that seem to fit and match our hypothesized animal here. But some are hollow, some are solid. So imagine a tube. Some translators actually use the word tubes of bronze. So there's hollow spaces in the bone, and some are solid. And that's indeed anatomically what we have in these sauropods in general, and even in Diplodocus in particular. So the leg bones, the ribs, solid, but the vertebrae have hollow spaces inside the bone, and raised ridges at points of tension. I mean, it's so precisely engineered. The vertebrae out towards the head got lighter and lighter weight and less dense, to the point where the last vertebra right behind the skull was the same density as styrofoam. And you have to have all these things in place. But we see the two different kinds of bones suggested subtly in the text, but then we see it, the real thing, literally in this animal.
Yeah, and it's hard again to take. It's hard. It seemed difficult to me as I was wrestling with this, and have wrestled with it, to take these anatomical descriptions and that they would apply somehow to some mythological creature or a motif for good and evil, or whatever the other interpretations are. That's the thing about it that's so striking, and the correlations are just so intriguing to me. Now, you already mentioned this is the largest known land animal. Verse 19 says that this creature is the pinnacle of the ways of God. Is that a good translation, Brian? Comment on that.
Well, I'm not the Hebraist in our set of co-authors,
Okay.
but according to what the experts that I worked with said, yeah, that's a good translation. And
Okay.
first, or pinnacle, or chief of the ways of God. And I think one way to think about that is to say this is the largest land animal that God ever created. He's taking credit for it, and he's saying only He who made him. So he's taking credit for actually making this creature. By the way, if we come to the text and say, well, this is not a real creature, then are we telling God He's didn't actually make it, even though His word says right here twice?
Yes.
It says, verse 15, which I made along with you. And now He's again claiming that He made him. I think He did make this creature, and the only way to interpret this with any respect for the text at all is to say it was a real creature. And we do have, like you said, a lot of matches. And here's another match. Biggest creature, chief of the ways of God. Seems to be a pretty decent match.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, and we should note too that even though Job is written in poetry, it tells a story, and you can use poetry to speak of things that are real. It doesn't mean that the thing described is mythical or poetic itself. So, and it all depends on the context, which of course we've been exploring. Okay, so we're making the suggestion here, of course, that men and dinosaurs would have been contemporaneous, which is radical. We've talked about this before, you and I, on the show. One of the evidences that is consistent with that claim is the traces of carbon-14 that have been found in dinosaur bones. And you've done extensive research on the question of carbon-14. Give us a little tutorial on that, Brian, and how that fits.
Well, we have done radiocarbon analysis of actually some Diplodocus bone. Some behemoth bones. By the way, the bone looks like this. This is just a fragment that I have. It's like a piece from, anyway, this is from Wyoming, and it's from the Morrison Formation where we find Diplodocus. It's on display. It's the famous iconic fossil at certain museums. Anyway, and you could see the pitted surface of the bone here. Well, we took part of the bone and sent it off to a lab, and they found radiocarbon in the bone. Now, it's, the age assignment is over 130 or whatever million years, but the maximum shelf life for radiocarbon is only 100,000. So the objectors have to come up with some way to stick very recent radiocarbon into the actual bone structure itself, and they have nothing but hand waving in those attempts so far. So that's one. And then we even have published in the literature, not by creation people like me, but by evolutionary scientists. And they found original proteins in sauropod bones, sauropods from the Morrison Formation even. So that's like anyway. So we have original like blood vessels, and then we have radiocarbon. Henry, blood vessels still in the bones.
Yeah,
they are not that old.
Yeah, it's an extraordinary, and we invite our audience to check out our archive where we've done episodes on dinosaur tissue and some of that with Dr. Thomas. Okay, we need to wrap up. Dr. Thomas, the time goes by so fast. So give us a bottom line implication of this, your final thoughts, if you would, sir.
Well, we've got multiple independent lines of evidence. Anatomical match to the text. We actually have something we didn't talk about at all, but listeners and viewers should explore human artifacts that look like the spit-and image of specific types of sauropod and other dinosaurs and other extinct creatures in human artifacts. You could explore that at icr.org. Come to our Discovery Center in Dallas and explore it even more. And we have original tissues, blood vessels, and we have radiocarbon that looks young. These features make these fossils look like they were recently deposited in Noah's flood. So all these independent lines converge to suggest that we're looking at a real creature, and no wonder God claims that he made it. And it's since gone extinct, but what we can do now is say, okay, I don't have to make strange adjustments to interpret. I can just read my Bible straightforwardly, and we can do that for not just this part of the Bible, but all the parts of the Bible, because God made his word to be made clear, to be knowable, so that we can know him, because he reveals who he is through his word.
It's excellent. Excellent. Well, thanks for doing this research. A fascinating subject. We hope that people will consider it. Appreciate it, Brian. Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you very much.
Friends, thank you for joining us for Digging for Truth. We appreciate your prayer, your support, and watching the program. We're so grateful for you, and we hope you'll consider these evidences that we present, ultimately pointing us to the reliability of Holy Scripture. We hope you have a great day.